I live in a southern U.S. state, in a small suburban town that most people who don't live within 20 miles have probably never heard of. I've got a nice, beautiful house with a perfect green lawn, a big pool in the backyard, and a perfect family. I married my high school sweetheart, and we have 4 wonderful kids and 3 dogs. From the outside, you would think I have it all. A great, quiet life with no problems. Nothing at all to complain about, but I carry inside me a deep, dark secret. Something my neighbors, my closest friends, my kids, even my wife doesn't know. Hell, I wouldn't even tell my favorite dog. My secret, the one that almost no one knows, is that I am a death row executioner. I took the job without really thinking about what I would actually have to do. I was barely out of high school and working as a corrections officer when I was approached, asking if I'd be interested in a special project. The current executioner was in need of some help, just as a short-term assignment, he told me. Little did I know that I would end up as the only executioner in the state and would carry out over 60 executions. Every execution means first preparing my mind, which is tough when I keep my work a secret. But I knew when I agreed to become the executioner that this would be my burden alone to bear. No one else in my family needs to be saddled with what I do in my line of work. I'm certainly not the first person to do this job, and I have a feeling I'll be far from the last. State executions have been a part of the U.S. way of life from the very beginning. Before there even was a United States in the 1600s when the colonists came over. They brought with them the British Penal Code from the United Kingdom and Europe. The Penal Code is the law used to govern the treatment of criminals, traitors, and blasphemers. And this code made ready use of capital punishment for crimes. Death was the required sentence for all kinds of petty crimes. Anything from stealing chickens to adultery to witchcraft would lead you to being sentenced to death. And back in the 1600s, they would have carried it out by hanging, stoning, or even burning at the stake. So at least today the method used is more humane, or at least I try to think so. Today, petty crimes bring with them a jail sentence, and now it's only a conviction for murder or treason that can lead to capital punishment. At least nowadays, the job that I do is not public, but before the 1900s, executions were mostly conducted with a public audience. It was only in 1936 that the last public execution was held in the U.S. Since then, all executions have remained a private affair, with only a very select few allowed to watch, usually the victim's family and maybe some of the law enforcement officials who were involved. With the huge crowds gone, I can keep my job a secret and carry my conscience alone. Not every prison has the facilities to conduct executions, but the prison I worked in as a CO just happened to have an execution chamber. With its pod-style buildings and clinical feel, this part of the prison can feel more like a campus on a research university than an execution site. But this is the place I work, a soulless place with a specific purpose. Putting aside for a moment the more on psychological issues, being the state executioner is a more difficult job to do than you might think. The preparation I conduct before an execution starts 2 weeks in advance when the inmate arrives at the facility. Oftentimes, they've come from a different prison in the state where they've been on death row for years. Our security team springs into action, providing round-the-clock security while the staff starts up a schedule of training for the day. We train for every possible scenario, such as if we meet an especially high level of resistance and violence from the inmate, or if they refuse to cooperate in any way. This training is supposed to prepare us for the job, and it makes me feel much more ready for logistical aspects of the day. But nothing can prepare you for the mental stresses. 24 hours before the execution, I like to step in and help with the death watch. It isn't strictly required that I take part in the final watch, but there's something about being able to see the inmate before they're led into the death chamber that makes the whole thing seem a little better somehow. My watch usually spans a section of time in the middle of the night. I record all movements, actions, and events that involve the inmate. The day of the execution is when the inmate eats their last meal and receives a final visit from family or friends, if they have anyone at all, that is. It seems like more often than not, no one shows up to that last visitation. I use this time to test the equipment that has been chosen for use in the execution. My family has basically no idea about the work I do, beside the fact that it's at a prison. I keep details scanned and try to tell them the smallest amount of information possible. That can get tough when we've encountered some violence or resistance and I come home with bruises or cuts. I am known for keeping order, and I'll never hesitate to jump in and break up a fight and restrain an aggressive or violent inmate myself. I hope my wife and children think I'm just a tough correctional officer who occasionally sees a little danger at the prison. As you can imagine, the day of the execution is always the toughest. I dread these days more than any other in my life. The inmates have been in this prison for at least 2 weeks at this point, and even if you haven't spoken to them, you can get to feeling like you know them just from the paperwork and reviewing of files. This only makes the job more difficult, and even though the process of the execution is carried out by a team, that doesn't get rid of the feeling of personal responsibility I have for ending a person's life. If the inmate has accepted their fate, then at least you know you will not meet resistance. But if they have not, then there is a tense air that circulates the whole prison, wondering what's going to happen in those final moments as they're led from their cell to the chamber. It's a horrible place to be for everyone involved. Working as an executioner is a strange experience, and it's left me questioning morality. How could you not when you've got a job that brings you face to face with death? As DNA evidence has become more and more advanced, many more inmates on death row have been found innocent of the crimes they were charged for. Oral Washington Jr. was the first person to be exonerated of his crimes while on death row thanks to DNA evidence. And since 1973, there have been over 150 exonerations where a death row inmate has been released and all charges dropped. I used to think that almost no one could end up here, exhaust all their appeals, and be put to death if they were actually innocent. Now I just don't know anymore. If you couldn't tell, I don't much enjoy my job. If I could go back in time and do things over again, I'd never accept that request to work with the executioner. I have to live with my actions, despite the fact that the law states it's legal. I have found this job to be very isolating. I constantly fear the judgment I would receive if my family, friends, and neighbors knew the truth, and I worry that they'd be judged just the same as me. My wife knows that I keep things from her, and it strained our marriage. Sometimes I think it'd be easier to hide an affair, or hell, a whole second family, than to keep this secret. In our state, the available methods are either electrocution, sending up to 3,000 volts of electricity directly into the person, or lethal injection, which injects a special cocktail of chemicals designed to end life as quickly and painlessly as possible. We've used electrocution since the 1800s, and for years and years was the most popular form of execution in the country. There's something about that chair and the raw power coursing through it that captured the public's imagination and has made it one of the iconic symbols of execution. I even remember seeing a documentary once where Thomas Edison used electricity to kill an elephant as part of a demonstration. But in the 1990s, lethal injection was introduced as the safe and humane form of ending someone's life, and it quickly became the most popular form of execution. Electrocution is my preferred execution method, mostly for selfish reasons, since it creates a distance between myself and the inmate, as I simply press a button, wait, and within about 2.5 minutes the job is usually done. With lethal injection, I'm using a syringe to put the lethal chemicals into a tube that's running to the condemned. The whole process feels more personal, more connected, and death can take minutes or even hours if the staff has trouble finding a vein. As the executioner, I'm always positioned behind a partitioning curtain, so I'm only able to see my equipment, never the actual inmate. Other members of staff lead the inmate into the room, and a doctor is present to check that the heart is stopped and give an official time of death after the method of execution is administered. I'm no different from my neighbor who works in an office or at the local factory, except that my job requires me to take a life. Every time I'm required to perform an execution, I have to justify to myself the reasons behind why this has to be done. I've always heard that you can have law without punishment, but some days that's hard to believe. I'm always trying to think of ways to help, to prevent people from even entering the system of correction in the first place. If I can help stop people from committing the crimes in the first place, then there will be fewer executions to undertake. I like to work with local schools, inviting the school kids into the prison and showing them around. I like to shock them and even frighten them a little. I take them to the death chamber and sit them in the chair. I explain how the execution takes place, and when electrocution is chosen, that 2,400 to 3,000 volts of electricity are passed through the person. The majority of the students take this tour very seriously, and I've even received letters of thanks from them after the visit. I just hope that by trying to educate this younger generation, that I can help some of these kids from even committing the crime in the first place and ending up in a place like this. However, this alone doesn't feel like it justifies the job for me. There must be more than I can do. I do sometimes think about leaving the job, but when you have a family to feed and a mortgage to pay, and the only thing on your resume is executioner, the prospect of finding new work is a scary idea. I have everything covered with this job, decent benefits, even a pension. And let's face it, if I wasn't doing this job, then someone else would. Sitting in my kitchen with my family around me, I'm no longer a state executioner. I'm once again just a family man. But I can never fully escape what I am. That stress is always there in the background, just waiting, as I'm never more than a phone call away from having to slip into my alter ego and once again become an executioner.